Clint Eastwood had always been someone who valued his privacy. After years of being in the public eye, he had carved out a quiet sanctuary for himself at his sprawling estate in the hills. His home was nestled in a secluded area, far from the prying eyes of the world. But even in his peaceful retreat, Clint wasn't immune to the occasional disruption. For the past few weeks, he had noticed something strange. His pool, which was meant to be a peaceful escape, had become the site of repeated trespassing. Every few days, he would catch a glimpse of strangers sneaking around his property, trying to gain access to his pool. At first, Clint had dismissed it as an isolated incident. Maybe they were lost, he thought. But as the visits became more frequent, it was clear that they weren't just random wanderers. They were deliberately trying to get into his private space. Clint, ever the patient man, decided to handle the situation calmly. One afternoon, as he sat by the pool reading a book, he noticed a group of teenagers sneaking past his gate and heading toward the pool area. Clint had had enough. He put down his book and walked over to the gate, his face serious but calm. As the teenagers approached the pool, Clint called out to them. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice carrying across the yard. The teenagers froze, caught off guard. They turned slowly, realizing they had been caught. "What do you think you're doing?" Clint asked, his tone firm but not angry. The teenagers, initially stunned by his presence, stammered out an excuse. "We were just taking a swim. We didn't think anyone was home." Clint raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "You didn't think anyone was home? You didn't think it was wrong to trespass on someone's private property?" The group of teens shifted nervously, unsure of how to respond. Clint Eastwood stood tall, his voice steady and calm. But there was an undeniable authority in his words. "I don't mind sharing a pool with someone," he said, his gaze firm. "But I do mind when people think they can just walk into someone else's property and help themselves. You have to respect people's boundaries." The teenagers looked down, clearly uncomfortable. Clint could tell that they hadn't expected this response. They were used to getting away with things, probably thinking they could sneak in unnoticed. But now they were faced with a man who had seen far more than they could ever imagine, and he wasn't going to let them off easily. "I'll tell you what," Clint continued, his voice still calm but carrying a sense of resolve. "Since you're already here, how about we make sure this lesson sticks with you?" The teens exchanged confused glances, unsure of what Clint meant. He motioned for them to follow him to the poolside. "You wanted to swim, right? Well, let's swim, but we'll do it the right way." Clint didn't wait for an answer. He moved toward the pool and sat at the edge, his feet dangling in the water. The teens hesitated for a moment, unsure if they were being pranked or if Clint was just being kind. But then Clint looked at them, his expression serious. "Go ahead, get in. But you're going to work for it. No more sneaking around, no more shortcuts. You want access to this pool? You'll earn it." At first, the teens were reluctant, still trying to figure out if they were in trouble or not. But Clint didn't let up. He stood up from the poolside, his voice growing firmer. "Get in the water. I'll be right here watching you." Slowly, the teens began to obey, their unease turning into awkward excitement. They didn't know what to expect, but Clint's authority was undeniable. The teenagers hesitated for a moment longer before one by one, they stepped into the pool. The water was cool, a welcome relief from the scorching sun. At first, it seemed like everything was going as expected. Clint was letting them swim as they had wanted. But what the teens didn't realize was that Clint wasn't just going to let this be a simple swim. He was teaching them a lesson, one that would stick with them long after they left his property. Clint crossed his arms and watched them, his expression unchanged. "All right, here's the deal," he called out to them. "I'm not just letting you hang out in my pool without teaching you something. You're going to work for your time. Here. I've been around long enough to know that nothing good comes from cutting corners." The teens looked at each other, confused but curious. "What do you mean?" one of them asked. Clint smiled slightly, his eyes sharp and direct. "I mean, you're going to do a few laps, but not just any laps. You're going to swim with discipline, no slacking off. You think you can just come in here and enjoy the perks without earning them? No way." The teens exchanged looks of hesitation, but Clint was already walking toward the poolside. "Go on," he said, motioning toward the far end of the pool. "I want you to swim across, but I don't want to see you just floating along. I want to see some effort. I want to see that you can push yourself." At first, the teenagers balked. They thought it was all a joke. But Clint's unwavering stare made them realize he wasn't playing. They reluctantly swam across the pool, their strokes slow and clumsy at first. But as they reached the other side, they could feel their muscles working, their hearts pounding and their bodies waking up to the challenge. Clint watched them with a quiet satisfaction, knowing this was how they would learn. Through hard work, not just a free ride. As the teenagers completed their first lap, Clint's voice rang out again, this time with more intensity. "Again," he said, "but this time I want to see you push harder. You can do better than that." They were out of breath, their arms aching, but something shifted within them. What had started as a fun and easy attempt to sneak into someone else's space had now become a test of their stamina and discipline. They had been caught in their misstep, and Clint was making sure they learned something. Reluctantly at first, they swam another lap, but this time, they put more effort into it. The water splashed around them as they moved faster, their strokes becoming more purposeful. Clint watched silently, a slight smile tugging at his lips. He wasn't trying to break them, but he wanted to show them the value of commitment and effort, the same values that had helped him throughout his career and life. As the teens reached the far end of the pool once again, they were panting, their faces red. They paused for a brief moment to catch their breath, their exhaustion setting in. Clint stood up from the poolside and addressed them. "Good," he said, his voice firm but approving. "Now you know that nothing comes easy. You don't get something for nothing. You can just take things from people. You have to earn them." The teens, still catching their breath, looked at Clint with a new sense of respect. They hadn't expected the lesson to come this way, but now they understood. It wasn't about swimming. It was about learning the value of hard work and respecting the boundaries of others. Clint nodded, pleased with their effort. "You're free to swim now," he said, his tone softer. "But remember this. Sometimes, you've got to work for what you want. It's a lesson that's worth remembering." The teens, humbled by the experience, swam a few more laps, but now with a new sense of gratitude. Clint had taught them something far more valuable than just how to swim. As the teenagers finished their laps, they gathered around the edge of the pool, their breathing still heavy but their expressions different. They had come to Clint's property thinking they could simply take what they wanted, without considering the consequences or the respect due to someone else's space. But now, as they stood there, reflecting on the lesson Clint had imparted, they realized how wrong they had been. The girl who had first snuck in stepped forward, looking at Clint with a mix of gratitude and newfound humility. "Mr. Eastwood," she began, her voice tentative, "We're really sorry. We didn't think about it like that. We just wanted to have fun and didn't realize how disrespectful it was. Thank you for teaching us." Clint looked at her, his gaze kind but firm. "Apology accepted," he said with a slight nod. "But let's remember, respect is earned. You can't expect to just take something without understanding its value." The other teens, now more aware of the lesson, nodded in agreement. One of them, a young man who had been quiet during the entire encounter, spoke up. "We should have never snuck onto your property, and we definitely shouldn't have disrespected you like that. We're sorry, Mr. Eastwood. It won't happen again." Clint smiled, a slight curve of his lips. "Good," he said, his voice calm but sincere. "I'm glad to hear that. I don't mind sharing what I have when it's earned, but you all need to understand the importance of boundaries and hard work." The teenagers, now humbled, spent the next few minutes in thoughtful silence contemplating the lesson they had learned. They weren't just sorry for trespassing. They were sorry for how they had disrespected a person they hadn't understood. As they left Clint's property, they walked away with something far more valuable than just a day by the pool. They had gained insight into the importance of hard work, respect, and integrity. And though Clint would never know the full extent of how much they had learned from that day, the impact of his lesson would stay with them for a lifetime. Weeks passed, and the group of teenagers who had once been reckless trespassers now found themselves reflecting on the lesson they had learned from Clint Eastwood. They had gone back to their daily lives, but something had changed within them. The lesson that Clint had given them, one based on respect, hard work, and understanding, had rooted itself deep in their minds. The girl who had initially spoken, up now volunteered at local community events, often helping with cleanup and offering a hand to those who needed it. She had learned, as Clint had shown her, that nothing in life came without effort. One of the boys, who had been especially defiant at the start, took it upon himself to start tutoring younger students in mathematics. He had realized the importance of discipline, not just in swimming but in all areas of life. His grades had improved, and with them his outlook on what he could accomplish through effort. They all stayed in touch, occasionally meeting to talk about the things they had been working on since that day by the pool. They often reflected on how Clint had taken the time to not just reprimand them, but to show them the value of respect, of boundaries, and of earning what you want in life. One afternoon, a few months later, the group returned to Clint's estate, though this time they weren't sneaking in. They approached the gate and rang the doorbell, respectfully waiting for someone to answer. Clint, who had been expecting a quiet afternoon, opened the door with a knowing smile when he saw who it was. "Back again?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, sir," the girl said, stepping forward with a confident smile. "We just wanted to thank you again for everything. We've learned a lot since that day, and we promise we'll never forget the lesson you taught us." Clint looked at them, his expression softening. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "Remember, it's not just about swimming or getting a free ride. It's about what you do after the lesson, how you use it to grow." The teens nodded, smiling, knowing they were leaving with something far more valuable than just another memory. They had learned something that would stay with them for a lifetime. Please subscribe to the channel for Clint Eastwood Respect. Thanks.